Hello, Sean here. Today I want to talk to you about meditation and anger and get you to reflect on why we don't hear those two words more often in the same sentence. So let's get started. Now, mindfulness is sold as this cure all panacea. And as much as I'm a fan of meditation, I try to do it on a daily basis and I find it really grounds me. So, on the one hand, I am a big proponent of it and I incorporate it as well in different ways in my coaching practice. And yet, I'm also very critical of the way mindfulness, or you might call it mindfulness, has filtered down into our into Western culture. How it often gets reduced to a caricature of itself, and it can end up being quite harmful. So, meditation has helped me, and I also see its limitations, especially in the way it's applied or misapplied in the personal development space. So, this is something that shows up a lot if you go to workshops. Things to do with, a friend was telling me about a workshop she attended to do with climate grief, the idea, the process of dealing with the strong emotions related to facing the potentially imminent, not potentially, they're upon us, the the um, the devastating consequences of the climate crisis, the poly crisis. So she was describing this kind of very therapeutic way of running the discussion, and that was a lot about processing emotions and being mindful of them. And I was reminded of how mindfulness is incorporated in a lot of these spaces in a way that actually I think is counterproductive because it seems to be a kind of numbing rather than coming into contact with truth, with facts which actually justify anger. We often are we assume anger is always a bad thing, and all the more so if you subscribe to a Buddhist worldview. And yet, that is actually, I think, a pretty dangerous distortion of Buddhist thought. So, I want to briefly talk about that today. So, this idea that mindfulness is not numbing yourself out, it shouldn't be spiritual bypassing. I think it often ends up being that if we're not careful. And true mindfulness has a deeply ethical and, dare I say, political dimension. So, and I think we should also ask ourselves why so many people, like myself included, are attracted to, for instance, Eastern traditions rather than, for example, Christianity. And I wonder if, on some level, this is not a criticism, but it's an invitation to reflect, whether it's because, for example, Christianity, it has maybe more overtly political overtones, whereas we see Buddhism as kind of through this naive lens as not having the baggage of Christianity and maybe not all the ethical and political implications. But that's just because we don't really understand this tradition because it's not our own. Now, I don't want to get bogged down in details, so let's move on. This idea that in Buddhism, mindfulness is more than just detachment. It's not numbness. It is what is referred to as equanimity. And we could think of it as a form of balance and steadiness of heart. It includes calm, but also compassion, loving kindness, and sympathetic joy. And that without those other elements, the calm on its own is sterile. It's indifferent. And the true goal of equanimity, of this inner peace that so many of us are seeking, is to turn ourselves into a vessel which can hold all of our emotions. And that includes anger. To build this vessel, which allows us to hold our emotions at a certain distance so that we can be in relation to them, not to be above them or below them or to ignore them, to be in relation with them, but without being them. And this is in acceptance and commitment therapy is referred to as cognitive diffusion. And I want to give the example of Thich Nhat Hanh and what is called engaged Buddhism. And engaged Buddhism is this idea of Buddhism which involves compassionate action. And so examples of this would be coming together to build schools and housing, preserving forests, passing clean water initiatives, working in prisons and hospices. And I was thinking, well, if that's engaged Buddhism and it's presented as this, we can think of it as this niche other way of practicing Buddhism. But if we think of it perhaps as the original Buddhism, well, if that's engaged Buddhism, what do we practice? Those of us, many, including myself, I don't have a community, which we call a Sangha, which is very important in Buddhism. We end up, you might call it disengaged Buddhism, because we're often practicing individually. Maybe not our fault. It's hard to find a Sangha, potentially. We treat mindfulness as an end unto itself rather than as a bridge to compassionate action. And so we're kind of losing the most valuable part of this whole tradition. And I want now to return to this idea of our vessel, us, you, as a vessel. And I'm thinking about this now as a coach. Why is it so many people feel stuck? I think a lot of both coaching and therapy may be less than helpful when we're more caught up in coping with the negative emotions, trying to bring them down, rather than trying to connect with them at a safe distance, at the right distance. And if you work on issues related to climate change or the poly crisis, I teach some of these concepts to my students, and if you are aware, if you are literate about what's happening to our planet right now, you should feel some sense of sadness and anger. Maybe not you should, but you're likely to. I don't know how you cannot. Okay? And I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm not supposed to feel angry. Angry is unspiritual. But in Buddhism, in classical Buddhism, there's this idea of a warning against hatred or ill will. But anger which is not inspired by hatred or ill will is not to be feared. It is not to be repressed. It is a bridge to moral clarity. And so again, our goal should not be through our meditation practice to get rid of anger, but to become stronger vessels to contain it, to hold it, to witness it. The Dalai Lama said the following: there are two types of anger. One type arises out of compassion. That kind of anger is useful. Anger that is motivated by compassion or a desire to correct social injustice and does not seek to harm the other person is a good or anger that is worth having. So, I'd like to conclude by inviting you to think about your own mindfulness practice if you have one. If you don't, maybe by knowing that your anger has a place in it, maybe it makes it more appealing. I would hope so. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. So, again, in conclusion, meditation is a way for us to build ourselves up as a vessel, to transform our anger into fuel to build the world we want to live in. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching.